The Last County Line. Part 1. The Wound in the Asphalt. Evelyn Harper drove into Ridgeway County, Illinois, and felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same physical dread she experienced when facing a tight deadline or a hostile source. She hadn't been back in 5 years, not since she left for Chicago to escape the small-town politics and the smothering presence of her father, Thomas Harper. Now, she was back for his funeral. The first thing Evie noticed was the road. It was pristine, a dark, unblemished ribbon of asphalt, wider than necessary, flanked by solar-powered streetlights. It looked less like a county highway and more like a corporate campus entrance. This was Immersive's work, the multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate that had stepped in 5 years ago to modernize the bankrupt county's infrastructure. Evie, a political reporter for the Chicago Tribune, knew the local story was a national headline. Immersive had taken over the county's municipal services, everything from traffic light timing to utility billing, under a radical program called Smart Governance. As she passed a sign welcoming her to Ridgeway, a predictive community, Evie's phone chirped, a notification overriding her navigation. Welcome, Evelyn Harper. Your vehicle profile has been verified. Current speed is 45 miles per hour. Optimal speed for this zone is 43 miles per hour to maintain fuel efficiency. EVS score impact, minus 0.2. EVS score, Economic Viability Score. Immersive's all-seeing metric that quantified every resident's contribution to the local GDP. It was everywhere, influencing everything from insurance premiums to school enrollment priority. Evie slammed her foot on the brake, dropping her speed to 43 miles per hour. She hated that she'd reacted instantly to the algorithmic suggestion. She pulled up the county obituary for Thomas Harper, beloved resident and former head librarian. Died peacefully of cardiac arrest. Peacefully. Evie snorted. Thomas Harper had been a firebrand, a conspiracy theorist who believed Immersive was turning their town into a corporate surveillance state. He'd spent the last 5 years of his life writing detailed letters to the Tribune, which Evie had politely, professionally ignored. She drove past the center of town. The old, greasy diner was gone, replaced by a sleek glass cube labeled The Hub. The classic brick library was still there, but now had a massive, illuminated digital marquee listing the days, optimized community events. She parked on her father's driveway, pulling her rental sedan right up to the front porch. The small, 2-story house looked exactly the same, but felt colder. Evie picked up the key hidden under a chipped ceramic gnome. As she inserted it into the lock, a light on the porch turned green. Access granted. User Thomas Harper registered 10 missed entry attempts in the last 7 days. He had been trying to get in or perhaps keep someone out. The paper trail. Inside, the house was a disaster, a monument to Thomas Harper's paranoia and obsessive work. Every available surface was covered in paper, printouts of Immersive bylaws, complex flowcharts drawn in Sharpie, and stacks of utility bills annotated with astronomical calculations. It was intellectual chaos. The coroner had already cleared the scene, but the house felt violated, searched. Evie walked into the living room, where her father had collapsed. The only thing missing was his battered leather satchel, which he took everywhere. She went to his home office. The computer, an ancient, air-gapped PC running Linux, was still powered on, displaying a complex, incomprehensible data visualization. But the monitor was cracked, and the hard drive tower looked like it had been pried open and stripped. "They didn't just find him, Dad," Evie whispered. "They searched him." Evie pulled open the bottom drawer of his old filing cabinet. She remembered this drawer. It was where he kept the truly sensitive material, usually disguised as old tax records. The drawer was empty. Evie sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and morbid guilt. She had come here expecting to dismiss his theories as the rantings of an old man, and now she was playing detective in his funeral attire. She turned to leave the room when she noticed something taped to the underside of the desk drawer, a small, black micro SD card, secured with a piece of faded masking tape. Evie carefully peeled the tape away. The card was unmarked. She held the tiny chip in her palm. Her father hadn't been careless. He hadn't been a fool. If he was working on something big, this would be his final insurance policy. She put the card in her pocket. It was time to find her first source, the high-score sheriff. Evie drove to the Ridgeway County Sheriff's Office. It was no longer a standalone building. It was housed within the gleaming, glass and steel AmeriSync data center complex, a massive, humming cube of servers located ironically next to the abandoned municipal courthouse. She asked for Sheriff Caleb Moore, her high school sweetheart. Caleb was unrecognizable. He still had the strong jaw and blue eyes she remembered, but his uniform was sleek, dark gray, and adorned with digital readouts. He greeted her with a professional distance that chilled her more than the news of her father's death. "Evie, I'm so sorry about Thomas," Caleb said, his voice flat. He escorted her into a small, sterile office that overlooked the server floor. "How peaceful was his death, Caleb?" Evie asked directly. Caleb didn't flinch. The official cause was cardiac arrest, exacerbated by years of stress. The medical sensors in the house confirmed it. The sensors that AmeriSync installed? The sensors that provide the fastest medical response in the state, Evie. We had an ambulance there in 4 minutes. Caleb sat down behind his desk, which displayed a glowing green number, 99.1. "What is that?" Evie pointed. "My EVS score," Caleb explained, almost proudly. "The sheriff's department is the most efficient in the state. We've cut crime by 40% and response times by 60%. I run a gold tier operation. And what happens if your score drops? Then I lose my contract and the county loses funding for its schools, hospitals, and my deputies." Caleb leaned forward. "This system works, Evie. Your father couldn't accept that efficiency is the new morality. He was resisting progress." Did he resist it hard enough to have his office stripped and his hard drive destroyed? Caleb looked away, his eyes scanning the server floor below. The data center found evidence of an attempted network intrusion. They had to neutralize the source for system stability. So they confiscated his research. It was destabilizing data, Caleb corrected. Thomas was a menace. He was trying to plant false information, trying to manipulate the EVS system to create chaos. He wanted the system to fail. Or he wanted the truth to get out, Evie countered. She stood up. "Caleb, my father left me something. I don't know what it is, but if you're protecting AmeriSync, you're just a corporate cop. And I'm going to report it." Caleb sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Evie, go home. Leave the county. Don't look at that data. If you start digging, you won't just ruin your score. You'll drop into the red zone, and the system won't ignore you. It will eliminate you." Evie walked out, the threat hanging heavy in the air. She got back in her car, feeling the little plastic square of the micro SD card heavy in her pocket. She had to get out of the Ridgeway network to see what was on it. She had to find the county line. Part 2, Chapters 4 to 6. Chapter 4, The Edge of the Grid. Evie drove north until the pavement changed again. She didn't stop until she crossed the invisible barrier that separated Ridgeway County from the rest of Illinois. The transition was physical. The car bumped over a seam in the asphalt where the pristine, AmeriSync-funded blacktop gave way to the cracked, gray state highway of the neighboring county. As soon as her tires hit the old road, her phone buzzed. A flood of notifications, emails, and missed calls from Chicago cascaded in. The artificial silence of the Ridgeway mesh network was broken. She pulled onto the shoulder of a gravel access road that ran parallel to a cornfield, the stalks withered and brown. It was a dead zone for the smart governance grid, the only place she felt safe opening the micro SD card. She booted up her laptop, a battered MacBook she kept air-gapped for sensitive source material, and inserted the card. It appeared on her desktop as a no_label. Evie opened it. There were no neatly organized folders. Just a chaotic sprawl of file types, PDFs of city council minutes, raw CSV spreadsheets, audio recordings, and screen captures of code. It looked like the digital equivalent of her father's living room. She clicked on a video file dated 2 weeks ago. The grainy footage showed Thomas Harper sitting at his kitchen table. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face gray and drawn, but his eyes were bright with a frantic energy. He was holding a piece of paper to the camera. "If you're watching this, Evie," Thomas's voice rasped through the laptop speakers, "it means the heart finally gave out. Or they found a way to make it look like it did." Evie flinched. The sound of his voice, dry, stubborn, familiar, hit her harder than the funeral had. "I don't have much time. They adjusted the logic gates on the utilities last week. My power surges every time I try to upload the data. They know I'm looking." Thomas leaned in, the camera losing focus for a second. "It's not just about efficiency, Evie. It's about culling. They're building a model for a self-sustaining austerity zone. If you don't contribute to the GDP of the county, you don't just get ignored. You get erased." He shuffled the papers. "Look at the file marked the bell curve. Look at what they did to Frank Miller. Look at what they're planning for the election." Thomas paused, rubbing his chest absently. "I'm sorry I wasn't the father you wanted, but I need you to be the reporter you are. Don't let them turn this town into a motherboard. People aren't data." The video cut to black. Evie sat in the silence of the car, the wind rocking the chassis gently. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, angry at the tears. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "Let's see the bell curve." She opened the spreadsheet. It was a list of 3,000 names, roughly 20% of the county's population. Next to each name was a calculated value. Economic Viability Score, EVS. The list was color-coded. Green for high viability, yellow for sustainable, red for... Evie scrolled to the bottom. The red zone. Hundreds of names. The elderly, the disabled, the chronically unemployed, former union workers. And next to each red name, under a column titled Recommended Action, the entries were chillingly bureaucratic. Reduce transit access. Deprioritize emergency response. Audit utility usage. Refer for relocation. It wasn't a governance plan. It was an eviction notice. Algorithmic drift. Frank Miller's auto shop was located on the south side of the county, in a district the map on Evie's phone labeled as Zone 4, low density/low priority. The shop was a corrugated metal shed surrounded by a graveyard of rusting tractors and sedans. Evie parked her rental next to a truck that looked like it had been cannibalized for parts. She found Frank under a hydraulic lift, wrestling with the axle of a Subaru. He was a giant of a man, his coveralls stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. "We're closed," Frank grunted without looking up. "Unless you got a 2014 alternator in your purse, I can't help you." "I'm not looking for repairs," Evie said. "I'm Thomas Harper's daughter." The wrench clattered to the concrete floor. Frank slid out from under the car on his creeper. His face was smeared with oil, but his eyes were wide. "Evie." He wiped his hands on a rag that was blacker than the oil. "Jesus, you look just like him, except you dress better." He stood up, groaning as his knees popped. "I heard he passed. I wanted to come to the service, but..." He gestured vaguely at the empty shop. "My truck wouldn't start. Electronic ignition locked me out. Said my insurance lapsed. Did it? Hell no. Paid it on the 1st. Frank spat on the floor, but the system said the payment was pending verification for 10 days. By the time it cleared, they'd revoked my driving privileges for operating an uninsured vehicle. Evie pulled the notebook from her bag. Frank, my dad had your name written down, with a score, 45.0. Frank let out a bitter laugh. Is that all I am? A 45? Last month, I was a 60. What happened last month? I tried to get a loan. Small business expansion. AmeriSync offers these microgrants for local businesses. I applied. The next day, my supplier canceled my credit line. Said I was high risk because of social associations. Social associations? Your dad, Frank said, meeting her eyes. We played poker on Thursdays. We talked. He told me about the sensors, the way they track where you go, who you talk to. I started asking questions at the town council meetings. Loud questions. He walked over to a workbench and picked up a tablet that looked ancient compared to the tech in the library. Look at this. He tapped the screen. I order parts. Brake pads. Filters. Standard stuff. The order goes through, but the delivery date keeps slipping. Logistical optimization delay, they call it. Meanwhile, the chain shop up near the data center, they get parts same day by drone. They're starving you out, Evie realized. They're making it impossible to be honest, Frank corrected. I had a guy in here yesterday offering to buy the lot. Offered me 20 cents on the dollar. Said the land was zoned for redevelopment. You know who he worked for? AmeriSync. A shell company. Green Horizon Realty. But the check had the same bank routing number as the county payroll. Frank leaned in, his voice dropping. They don't arrest you, Evie. They don't shoot you. They just turn down the volume on your life until no one can hear you scream. Then they buy your house for scrap. Evie looked at the rusting cars in the lot. It was a slow-motion siege. Frank, she said, if I can prove the algorithm is biased, that it's targeting dissenters, would you go on record? Frank hesitated. He looked at his dead shop, then at the camera mounted on the telephone pole across the street. Record, he muttered. Evie, look at my phone. He held up his cell. No bars. I've been in a dead zone for 3 days. You think that's an accident? The user agreement. Evie returned to town as the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the neatly manicured town square. The AmeriSync influence was everywhere. The smart streetlights that brightened as she walked under them. The digital kiosks replacing the old bulletin boards. She needed coffee. Real coffee, not the pod stuff at her dad's house. She walked into the Hub, a cafe that had replaced the old diner. It was aggressively modern. Exposed brick, succulent plants, and a QR code on every table to order. She sat in a booth near the back, opening her laptop, but keeping the Wi-Fi off. She was typing up her notes from the meeting with Frank when a shadow fell across her keyboard. Evelyn Harper, a smooth voice said, "It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you." Evie looked up. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been generated by an AI instructed to create trustworthy executive. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, expensive loafers, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And you are?" Evie asked, not closing her laptop. "Julian Thorne, Director of Community Integration for AmeriSync." He gestured to the seat opposite her. "May I?" "It's a free country," Evie said. "Or so I hear." Thorne chuckled, a dry, polite sound. He sat down, placing a sleek tablet on the table between them. "I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas was a brilliant man. Misguided, perhaps, but brilliant." "He thought you were killing the town," Evie said flatly. "On the contrary, we saved it." Thorne tapped the table. "Before we arrived, Ridgeway was bankrupt. The schools were closing. The opioid crisis was rampant. Now, test scores are up. Overdoses are down. Property values are rising. For the people in the green zone," Evie said. "What about Frank Miller?" Thorne didn't blink. Mr. Miller is a tragic case of failure to adapt. The economy is changing, Evelyn. We can't save every obsolete business model. We provide the tools. If people refuse to use them, he shrugged. Is that what you call social profiling? Failure to adapt. Thorne's smile tightened at the edges. We call it predictive resource management. It's the future of governance. Why waste tax dollars sending a patrol car to a low-crime neighborhood? Why give a business loan to someone with a 90% statistical probability of default? It's math, Evelyn. It's not personal. It felt personal when you flagged my father as a threat. Thorne leaned forward. The corporate veneer slipped, just for a second, revealing something cold and hard underneath. Your father was disrupting a delicate ecosystem. He was introducing noise into the signal. And now, I worry you might be doing the same. Is that a threat? It's an offer. Thorne slid the tablet across the table. It displayed a contract. We need a communications liaison. Someone who understands the local culture, but speaks the language of the future. The salary is substantial. 3 times what the Tribune pays you. Full access to our data. The real data, not the rumors. Evie looked at the number. It was enough to pay off her Chicago mortgage and buy a summer home. It was a bribe, naked and shivering. And all I have to do is stop asking questions? All you have to do is help us tell the right story, Thorne corrected. The story of how Ridgeway became the model for the rest of America. Evie closed her laptop with a snap. She pushed the tablet back. I'm not interested in fiction, Mr. Thorne. Thorne stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the tablet and stood. A pity. The offer stands for 24 hours. After that, he checked his watch. Well, the algorithm updates every night at midnight. It recalculates risk. I'll take my chances, Evie said. I'm sure you will. Thorne turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Evelyn? You might want to check your rental agreement. I believe you've exceeded the mileage cap for the day. The penalties can be quite steep. He walked away, blending seamlessly into the crowd of young tech workers filtering in for lattes. Evie grabbed her phone. She checked her banking app. Alert! Account frozen due to suspicious activity. She checked her rental car app. Vehicle status. Immobilized. Please contact support. Evie looked out the window. Her car was parked at the curb. The hazard lights were flashing slowly, rhythmically. Locked. She was 10 miles from her father's house, with no car, no access to her money, and the sun going down. Thorne wasn't waiting for midnight. The update had already begun. Predictive dispatch. The hazard lights of the rental car pulsed with a rhythmic, mocking amber glow. Click flash. Click flash. Evie stood on the curb, the October wind cutting through her coat. She had tried the rental company's support line 3 times. Each time, an AI voice assistant named Shelby politely informed her that her vehicle was in asset protection mode due to a violation of the terms of service and that a recovery team had been dispatched. Passers-by, mostly young professionals with employee badges on lanyards, glanced at her and gave her a wide berth. In Ridgeway, trouble was contagious. Stopping to help a woman with a locked car might dock you points for traffic obstruction or inefficient loitering. A pair of headlights swept over her, blindingly bright. A sleek, black SUV with a light bar recessed into the roof pulled up to the curb. The words Ridgeway County Sheriff were stenciled on the side in matte gray, barely visible against the black paint. The window rolled down. Car trouble. Sheriff Caleb Moore asked. The interior of his cruiser was bathed in the soft blue glow of multiple monitors. You could say that, Evie said, crossing her arms. Julian Thorne bricked my rental. Caleb didn't look surprised. He unlocked the passenger door. Get in, Evie. You're loitering in a commercial zone after peak hours. It looks bad. Am I under arrest? Not yet. But if that tow truck gets here before I get you out of here, You might be cited for abandoned property." Evie hesitated, then opened the door. The cruiser smelled of new leather and ozone. The dashboard was less like a car and more like a cockpit. A central screen displayed a scrolling feed of license plates and names as cars drove past them.
Green. Green.
Yellow.
Green.
Where to? Caleb asked, pulling back into traffic.
Home.
Dad's house. Caleb drove with an easy, one-handed confidence. "You poked the bear, Evie. I told you not to." "He offered me a job," Evie said. "A bribe, actually, to stop asking why Frank Miller is being starved out of business."
Caleb sighed.
"Frank is stubborn. He refuses to digitize his inventory. The system can't integrate with him." "The system is rigged, Caleb. It's designed to fail people like Frank." Evie pointed at the screen on the dashboard. "What does that say about me right now?" Caleb glanced at the monitor. He tapped a button, blanking the screen. "It says you're a high-variance non-resident. It means you're unpredictable. And that makes me a threat? In a system designed for stability? Yes." Caleb stopped at a red light. "Look, Evie, you see this town? 5 years ago, we had meth labs in the abandoned high school. We had a 40-minute response time for 911 calls. Last week, my deputies stopped a domestic assault before the first punch was thrown because the algorithm flagged a spike in stress voice patterns from a smart speaker." "You're listening inside people's homes?" "We're monitoring decibel levels and keywords," Caleb corrected, his jaw tightening. "We saved a woman's life. Doesn't that matter?" "At what cost?" Evie asked softly. "You're not a sheriff anymore, Caleb. You're just a security guard for a server farm." The car went silent. Caleb stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the wheel. He drove the rest of the way without speaking. When he pulled into the gravel driveway of the Harper house, he didn't unlock the doors immediately. "A merry sink pays for the cruisers," he said, his voice low. "They pay for the body cams, the training, the pension fund. The county was broke, Evie. We were dissolving. I did what I had to do to keep the badge on the door." He hit the unlock button. "Get that car moved by morning," he said, "or I have to impound it. I can't override the system twice." Evie stepped out into the cold night. "Thanks for the ride, Caleb." "Evie," he called out before she shut the door. She looked back. "Keep the heat low tonight," he said enigmatically. "Energy grid is acting up." He drove off, the taillights disappearing into the dark. Evie walked to the front door. She keyed in the code. Nothing. She tried again. The pad flashed red. Lockout active. She used the physical key. It turned, but stiffly. She stepped inside. The house was freezing. She could see her breath in the hallway. She checked the thermostat. It was blank. A message scrolled across the tiny LCD screen. Remote override, grid stability mode. Ambient temp set to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Energy grid acting up, she muttered. "Sure, Caleb." She was under house arrest, and they were freezing her out. Analog ghosts. By midnight, the temperature inside the house had dropped to 50 degrees. Evie had put on 2 of her father's flannel shirts and wrapped herself in a quilt from the linen closet. She sat on the living room floor, feeding old newspapers into the fireplace. The analog warmth of the fire was the only thing a MarySync couldn't throttle remotely. The internet was down. Her phone had no service. The house was a dead zone. Evie worked by the light of the fire and a battery-operated camping lantern she'd found in the basement. She had spread the contents of Thomas's box and the data from the SD card across the rug. Without the internet, she couldn't cross-reference the data with public records. She had to do it the old-fashioned way, logic and paper. She picked up a file-marked project, Baseline. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a collection of psychological profiles. Evie began to read, and the chill in her bones had nothing to do with the temperature. Subject 104. Anxiety induced via random utility disruption. Result: compliance increased by 14%. Subject 209. Financial stress induced via credit hold. Result: subject relocated to Zone 4 voluntarily. They're not just watching, Evie whispered. They're hurting. She picked up a map of the county. Her father had drawn on it in red marker. Large circles covered the downtown area and the main residential districts. Coverage zone, he had scrawled. But there were gaps. Thin slivers of land where the circles didn't overlap. The topography of the county, the limestone ridges and deep valleys, created natural dead zones where the mesh network couldn't reach. One spot was circled heavily, the quarry.
Zone 0.
Evie looked at the date on the file. It was from 2 days before Thomas died. He had been planning to meet someone there. She grabbed another piece of paper, a flyer for an upcoming town hall meeting regarding the future of Ridgeway. It was scheduled for tomorrow night. Handwritten in the margins of the flyer were notes in Thomas's spiky script. They need a catalyst. They need a reason to initiate Phase 2. The riot. Evie sat back. If a Mary Sink wanted to prove that their smart governance was necessary, they needed disorder. They needed to show that without the algorithm, chaos reigned. And if Thomas was right, they weren't going to wait for a riot. They were going to manufacture one. A noise came from the kitchen. A distinct metallic click. Evie froze. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. Who's there? Silence. Then a low, static hiss. It was coming from the pantry. Evie crept toward the kitchen, the poker raised. She opened the pantry door. On the top shelf, behind a stack of canned peaches, an old ham radio sat dusty and forgotten. It was buzzing. Harper, come in. Thomas. The voice was distorted, buried in white noise. Evie scrambled up on a stool and grabbed the mic. She pressed the button.
This is Evie.
Thomas is gone.
Static.
Then the voice came back, clearer this time.
Evie.
This is Marisol. Thank God. I saw your car got bricked. Are you safe? I'm cold, Evie said. And I'm locked in. How are you talking to me? Your dad set up a repeater on the ridge. It bypasses the cell towers. Listen, Evie, you need to get out of the house.
Now.
Why? I'm looking at the dispatch log. They just flagged your address for a wellness check based on erratic thermal readings. They're sending a mental health response team. They're coming to commit you, Evie. 5,150 hold. Pending evaluation. Evie looked at the fire. The thermal reading. They knew she was burning things. How much time do I have? 6 minutes. Maybe less.
Get to the quarry.
The north side, by the old crusher. I'll meet you there. I don't have a car. Then run. The 0 zone. Evie ran. She exited through the back door, jamming the manual lock with a chair just in case. She cut through the overgrown backyard, hopping the fence that separated her father's property from the dark, dormant soybean fields beyond. The ground was uneven, freezing mud sucking at her boots. She didn't use a flashlight. The moon was hidden behind clouds, but the ambient glow from the distant data center, a halo of light pollution, gave her enough visibility to see the tree line. She heard the siren as she reached the woods. It wasn't the wail of a police car. It was a low, undulating warble, the specific siren for the community care units. She looked back. Blue and white strobe lights washed over the front of the house. 2 figures in white tactical gear were breaking down the front door. They hadn't knocked. Evie turned and plunged into the woods. The quarry was 2 miles away. The terrain was rough, limestone outcroppings and dense underbrush. Evie moved as fast as she could, her breath tearing at her lungs. She kept checking the sky. Drones. She could hear them, a high-pitched whine like a mosquito in your ear. They were scanning the perimeter. Stay in the trees. Avoid the open. She reached the edge of the quarry 40 minutes later. It was a massive scar in the earth, flooded at the bottom, the water black and still. The old rock crusher, a rusting skeleton of iron, stood silhouetted against the sky. Evie, the whisper came from the shadows of the machinery. Marisol stepped out. She was wearing a dark hoodie and carrying a backpack. You made it, Marisol said, grabbing Evie's arm to steady her. Did they see you? I don't think so. They broke down the door, Marisol. They were wearing tactical gear. Containment unit, Marisol said grimly. They use them for high-risk psychological interventions. Basically, they bag you and drug you until your scores stabilize. My dad, Evie gasped, realizing. Did they do that to him? Marisol looked down. He called me the night he died. He said he heard the warble. He said he wasn't going to let them take him to the wellness center.
I think he might have taken something.
To stop his heart before they could get in. Evie felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't a heart attack. It was a defiant exit. He died free, Evie whispered. He died so you could finish this, Marisol said. She opened her backpack and pulled out a ruggedized tablet. Look, I pulled this from the server before I clocked out. This is the script for tomorrow's town hall. Evie looked at the screen. It wasn't a speech. It was an operational timeline. 1900 hours, doors open. 1915, mayoral address. 1930, agitator deployment, Group B. 1945, trigger event, pyrotechnic. 2000 hours, emergency declaration / curfew initiation, agitator deployment. Evie read, They hired people, Marisol explained. Out-of-towners. They're going to start a fight. Throw something. Maybe a firebomb. The algorithm predicts a 94% chance of civil unrest if a loud noise occurs during the speech on property taxes. They're going to make sure the noise happens. Why? Because the county board votes on the total integration contract next week, Marisol said. It gives a MarySync legal authority over the police and emergency services permanently. Right now, there's resistance. But if there's a riot, if people are scared, they'll vote for safety. They'll vote for control. Evie looked at the timeline. 1945, trigger event. We have to stop it, Evie said.
How?
We can't go to the police. Caleb is either in on it or too blind to see it. The state police won't intervene in a local matter without evidence. We have evidence, Evie said, tapping the tablet. But we can't just upload it. They'll scrub it. She looked at the rusting rock crusher. We need to show them, Evie said. Not the internet. The people. At the town hall. Does the community center still have that massive projection screen for movie nights? Yes, Marisol said. But it's networked. A MarySync controls the feed. Every feed has a source. Evie said, a plan forming in the adrenaline-soaked chaos of her mind. My dad taught you SQL, Marisol. Did he teach you how to patch a hardline into a localized broadcast node? Marisol smiled, a terrified, sharp expression. He taught me how to pirate satellite TV. Same principle. Good, Evie said. Tomorrow night, we're not going to stop the riot. We're going to broadcast the script while they're acting it out. Marisol shivered. They'll kill us, Evie. If we hijack the town hall feed, that's cyberterrorism. No, Evie said, looking back toward the lights of the town. It's journalism. Part 4. Chapters 10 to 12. The Trojan Connection. The day dawned gray and cold, mirroring Evie's mood. She and Marisol spent the morning in the zero zone, the quarry, moving only when absolutely necessary, hiding their supplies beneath the skeletal framework of the old rock crusher. Marisol had a bag full of equipment, a small, specialized router, a spool of shielded copper wire, Thomas Harper's old soldering iron, powered by a portable battery pack, and her ruggedized tablet. The community center is the main node for this whole quadrant, Marisol explained, tracing lines on a grainy digital map of the building. AmeriSync didn't run new fiber. They just piggybacked onto the old municipal infrastructure your dad helped install 20 years ago. Evie watched, fascinated, as Marisol pointed out the utility schematics. The projection screen feed runs off a secure distribution box in the auditorium's upper corner. It's supposed to be air-gapped from the public Wi-Fi, but AmeriSync is greedy. They use the same Cat6 line for their secure presentation and for the lobby check-in kiosks. A single point of failure, Evie mused. A single point of entry, Marisol corrected, her glasses slipping down her nose as she hunched over the tablet. Your dad's gift. He found the physical injection point where the line is most vulnerable, a utility closet near the rear loading dock. We won't be able to hack the software, but we don't have to. We'll use this. Marisol held up the small, specialized router. It's a network tap. We install it directly into the line, split the signal, and inject our own stream. We're using Thomas's old repeater signal, broadcasting from the quarry ridge, to ping the tap. Our signal looks like a high-priority, encrypted administrative update. The AmeriSync software should see it as a necessary patch and switch the display feed automatically. And what happens if it doesn't? We get arrested for tampering with federal infrastructure, Marisol said, not looking up. Or worse, they can track this tap immediately if the security protocols detect an anomaly. Evie felt a surge of respect for the data scientist. Marisol wasn't built for this. She was built for quiet rooms and mathematical precision, yet here she was planning a high-stakes electronic coup. Why are you doing this, Marisol? Evie asked. You have a stable job. A son. Marisol stopped soldering, the iron tip sizzling quietly. She looked out over the black water of the quarry. My son, Mateo, has type 1 diabetes. AmeriSync runs the county pharmacy service now. 3 months ago, the algorithm decided he was non-compliant because I missed a mandatory virtual health meeting. I was covering an extra shift here at the library. His prescription for insulin was downgraded from 3 months to 1 week, every week. It requires manual authorization. Every Monday, I wait an hour to see if my son gets his medication. A single tear tracked a path through the grime on Marisol's cheek. It's not convenience, Evie. It's blackmail. They want total control, and they know the fastest way to get it is through our children. Your father was the only one who saw it. He was trying to upload a file called the Insulin Logic Gate the night he died. I need to know what was in it. Evie looked at the small pile of equipment that represented the totality of their resistance. Then let's show them the script. They spent the afternoon refining the broadcast file, a synchronized display showing Thomas's operational timeline, the EVS scores of prominent community members, and finally, the damming project, baseline findings detailing the manufactured psychological stress. The quarry felt less like a hideout and more like a command center. The fracture. At 6:45 p.m., the parking lot of the Ridgeway Community Center was already full. Evie stood across the street, huddled in the doorway of an abandoned storefront. She wore a dark jacket with the hood up, trying to look unremarkable. Marisol, carrying her backpack of modified gear, had slipped into the building via the delivery entrance 10 minutes ago, pretending to be a late-shift janitor. Evie checked her watch. 6:55 p.m. 1900 hours, doors open. She pulled out her father's notebook, flipping to the page with Caleb Moore's name. Moore, C, 99.1, gold tier. Compromised. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. Julian Thorne, immaculate in a gray suit, stepped out, followed by 2 clean-cut, large men in tactical polos. Thorne scanned the street with a practiced, predatory gaze before walking into the town hall. Evie walked across the street, merging into the stream of residents filtering into the auditorium. The mood inside was tense. The hall was packed, a mix of older, distressed residents in work clothes and younger, well-dressed AmeriSync employees. The air was thick with unspoken resentment. Evie took a seat near the back, keeping her head low. On the stage, a massive projection screen glowed blue, displaying the AmeriSync logo and the title, Ridgeway's Digital Tomorrow. At 7:15 p.m., Mayor Denton, a portly man who looked increasingly uncomfortable in his new role as AmeriSync spokesman, began his address. He spoke in platitudes about synergy and smart investment. Evie kept her eyes on the digital clock ticking down on her phone, 7:30 p.m. The mayor was finishing a tedious section on tax reassessment when a commotion started near the side entrance. 1930. Agitator Deployment, Group B. A man in a torn baseball cap stood up and yelled, "Where's the money from the infrastructure grants? Mayor? You promised jobs." A few people cheered. Then, a second man, clearly an outsider, jumped up and shouted something about property rights. The AmeriSync security detail immediately moved to intercept, but too slowly. The atmosphere shifted from discontent to manufactured fury. Evie gripped the edge of her seat, waiting for the trigger. 7:44 p.m. On stage, Mayor Denton was flustered. "Please, folks, we can discuss this civilly. Security, please remove those men." 1945, trigger event, pyrotechnic. At exactly 7:45 p.m., a sudden, deafening crash erupted near the back wall. Someone had thrown a heavy brick, or something that sounded like it, through the emergency exit window. Screams.
Panic.
People surged to their feet, rushing for the doors. At that exact moment, the AmeriSync logo on the projection screen vanished. The screen went black, then burst to life with jagged text. Operation Choke Point. Execution script. The room fell silent as people stared, stunned, at the giant screen. The text scrolled down. 1930. Agitator Deployment, Group B. 1945. Trigger event, pyrotechnic. Then, the EVS scores began to fill the screen, flashing like a cruel leaderboard. Frank Miller. Autoshop 45.0 red. Restricted. Thomas Harper, Library 89.2, prior threshold warning. Marisol Vega, Data Liaison 71.0, yellow. High stress. Then a new list appeared. Phase 2 targets. Zonal consolidation. The list contained names of every resident who had spoken out against AmeriSync, including the man in the torn baseball cap who had started the heckling. Mayor Denton was frozen on the stage. Julian Thorne, however, was in motion. He sprinted toward the corner where the distribution box was located. Evie stood up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Caleb Moore, the sheriff, standing near the back exit. His hand was hovering over his pistol, but he wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking at the screen, his face a mask of shock, specifically at the image that now dominated the feed, a screenshot of his own file. Moore, C. Sheriff 99.1 gold tier. Compromised. Thorne reached the control panel and began frantically pulling cables. The screen flickered, went to static, and then, for a split second, Marisol's final message flashed. Huge and undeniable. People are not data. We are not a bell curve. Then the lights went out. The room plunged into chaotic darkness. The county line. The emergency lights kicked on, casting the auditorium in an eerie, red-tinged glow. The sound of shouting and running was everywhere. Evie pushed her way through the panicking crowd toward the stage. She needed to know Marisol was safe. She found Marisol in the upper corner, near the distribution box, her face pale, the network tap dangling from a severed cable. "It's done," Marisol gasped. "He saw me. Thorne saw me. We have to go." Evie pulled Marisol toward the rear door, away from the main exit where the genuine chaos was starting to boil over. As they reached the back corridor, they ran straight into Julian Thorne. He was breathing heavily, his suit jacket torn where he'd snagged it on the control panel. "You suicidal bitches," Thorne spat, grabbing Marisol's arm. "You've destabilized the entire model." Evie didn't think. She swung the heavy, hard edge of Thomas's notebook, still in her pocket, straight into Thorne's jaw. Thorne staggered back, clutching his face, momentarily stunned. "Go, Marisol, go," Evie yelled. They ran out the rear loading dock, emerging into a small, fenced utility yard. Beyond the chain-link fence was the open road. A shadow detached itself from the building. Caleb Moore. He stood blocking their path to the fence gate. "Stop," Caleb commanded, his voice tight. "Evie, you know what you did? You just threw this town back into the dark ages. People are going to get hurt." "They're already getting hurt," Evie shouted, standing in front of Marisol. "Your employers manufactured a riot to trick people into giving up their freedom. Your score says compromised. Caleb, what is a merry sink holding over you?" Caleb lifted his hand, pointing at the fence. "I'm giving you 5 seconds. After that, I report an armed intrusion on protected infrastructure." Marisol yanked a pair of wire cutters from her bag. "For seconds, Evie." Evie looked at Caleb. He was sweating, his eyes darting between her and the flickering lights of the town hall. He was calculating the risk, not enforcing the law. "Caleb," Evie said, speaking to the quarterback, the community boy, not the sheriff. "They killed my father. They made him choose between the algorithm and life." Caleb's gaze fell. He lowered his hand slightly. 3, he muttered, not moving. Marisol ripped through the chain link, the cutter shearing the metal with a sharp, wrenching sound. 2. They scrambled through the gap. They heard Thorne's voice echoing from the utility dock. "Sheriff, stop them. They are terrorists." Evie and Marisol plunged into the darkness of the road. Caleb turned and faced the utility dock. He raised his radio to his mouth, then paused, looking out toward the darkness where Evie and Marisol had vanished. Evie didn't look back. She knew where she was going, the county line, the place where the signal died and the jurisdiction changed. It was the only line of freedom left in Ridgeway. "We need a car, Marisol," Evie panted as they ran along the shoulder. "I know a guy," Marisol said, clutching her side. "He runs a small junkyard near the state border. He's red zone. Total blackout. But he owes your father a favor." The siren of a police cruiser wailed behind them. This time, the true, urgent sound of a real law enforcement response. They were officially fugitives. Part 5, The Blackout Mechanic. Evie and Marisol ran until their lungs burned, and the chaotic sound of the town was replaced by the low, steady rush of the wind through the tall, empty cornfields. They reached the state highway, the dividing line between Ridgeway's hyper-efficient grid and the older, ignored landscape beyond. They found the junkyard precisely where Marisol's map had indicated, a massive, sprawling burial ground of metal and forgotten machines, presided over by a corrugated steel sign that read, "Silas Salvage and Reclamation. Cash only." It was a beautiful, defiant mess. The ground was slick with oil and mud, and towering stacks of crushed cars leaned precariously against each other, creating a skyline of rust. The lack of order was a physical rebuke to the sterile precision of a merry sink. A low light glowed from a small cinder block office near the back. "Silas used to be a long-haul trucker," Marisol whispered, pulling her hood tighter. "Your dad helped him beat an illegal foreclosure 10 years ago. Silas knows how to stay invisible." They picked their way through the wreckage, stepping over exposed engine blocks and tangled wire. As they approached the office, a large, dark figure emerged, holding a heavy wrench, like a club. "Who the hell is out here?" the man barked. He was enormous, with hands the size of oil filters and a face perpetually etched with distrust. "Silas, it's Marisol Vega. And this is Evie Harper, Thomas Harper's daughter." Silas lowered the wrench an inch, his eyes narrowed on Evie. "Harper's girl. Thought you left that life behind." "I did," Evie panted, leaning against a rusted hulk of a minivan. "But I think the life followed me back. We need help, Silas. A Mary Sink knows where we are. We need a way out of the county and a place to lay low for a few hours. Somewhere off-grid." Silas stared at the two women, one, a city journalist covered in grime, the other, a frightened data analyst. He looked beyond them, toward the distant, faint glow of Ridgeway's central lights. "Thomas said you were coming. Said if the system started to buckle, you'd be the anchor." Silas scratched his beard. "You're fugitives, right? Disrupting a public assembly? Attempted sabotage of infrastructure?" "We exposed a conspiracy to manufacture a riot," Evie corrected. "Same difference to them." Silas grunted and dropped the wrench. It landed with a heavy thud on the dirt. "Get inside. You track too clean to be standing out here." The air is thinner near the county line, but they still listen. The office was stiflingly hot, heated by a wood-burning stove. The walls were covered not with calendars, but with detailed, hand-drawn maps of the county's subterranean gas and water lines. Silas was running his own parallel governance. He tossed them a thermal blanket and 2 cans of lukewarm soda. "You stay here. Don't use your phones. I run a Faraday cage in this building. No signal in, no signal out." Evie, finally safe, felt the adrenaline crash. She pulled Thomas's small, black notebook from her jacket. The corner was bent where she'd hit Thorne. The physical, analog object was the heaviest weapon she possessed. "We need to know the rest of the plan, Marisol," Evie said, taking a sip of the sickly sweet soda. "My dad said he was uploading a file called the Insulin Logic Gate." Marisol pulled the ruggedized tablet from her backpack, powering it up inside the thick metal box of the Faraday cage. She navigated through the chaotic files on the micro SD card. "Found it," she said. "It's a compressed, encrypted package. Thomas must have finished the upload sequence just before she stopped, unable to say the word. She initiated the decryption. They watched the progress bar inch agonizingly slowly across the screen, knowing that every tick was a secret peeled away from a Marisink's fortress. The cost of gold. Back in Ridgeway, Caleb Moore was standing in the deserted auditorium of the community center. The riot had been easily contained by a Marisink's contracted security, who were far more efficient than Caleb's own deputies. The agitators had vanished, their purpose fulfilled. The air smelled of broken glass and lingering fear. Julian Thorne stood before Caleb, his jaw bruised and swelling, his rage cold and contained. "They're gone, Sheriff," Thorne said, his voice dangerously level. "The woman who exposed confidential data, assaulted an Marysink official, and incited a public disturbance is gone. And you let her walk." Caleb met his gaze. "I gave the trespassers a command to halt. They refused. I did not see an imminent threat to life that warranted lethal force." "Imminent threat to life?" Thorne scoffed. "You allowed the core security model for the entire county to be broadcast to a room full of potential anarchists. We had to initiate a level 3 blackout to stop the signal. We are in damage control." Thorne opened his own Marysink tablet. "I'm looking at your real-time performance metrics, Caleb. Your score, the 99.1 you worked so hard for, is plummeting. It's currently showing significant variance. We cannot have a volatile element in charge of the sheriff's department during a crisis." "You can't fire me," Caleb said. I'm an elected official. We don't need to fire you, Caleb, Thorne said, a thin, cruel smile crossing his face. We just need to expose the compromised element of your profile to the county board. The reason you have that 99.1 score isn't because you're effective, it's because you're compliant. And we ensure compliance through leverage. Caleb felt the familiar, heavy weight of the secret settle in his gut. I need access, Caleb said, his voice hollow. Show me the file. Thorne navigated his tablet, the screen a blur of proprietary interfaces, and then handed it over. Caleb looked at the screen. The file was labeled More M. Long-term care logistics. Mandy Moore, his mother. She had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of neurological degeneration 5 years ago, right when Ridgeway County's budget had dissolved. A Mary Sink had stepped in, providing a completely custom, hyper-expensive, in-home care program, the only thing keeping her condition stable. It was a service no traditional insurance company would touch. Compromise lever. A Mary Sink was paying for her life. The file contained the logistics gate, the protocol for shipping her specialized, custom-synthesized medication. It was entirely routed through the AmeriSync network, bypassing all FDA and federal oversight, existing only within the Ridgeway ecosystem. If you move against us, Caleb, Thorne said softly, watching the light die in the sheriff's eyes, your mother's medication stops shipping. No one else in this county can provide it. We control the data. We control the logistics. She'll be dead in 4 weeks. Caleb handed the tablet back. He felt sick, his ambition, his pride, and his gold score turning to ashes. Find Evie Harper, Thorne commanded. I want her in custody by morning, and I want the media cycle fixed. You do this, and your score stabilizes. You let her escape the county, and your mother's next appointment with the doctor gets canceled. Caleb walked out of the auditorium. He got in his cruiser and drove to the data center, circling the massive, humming structure 3 times. He wasn't the law here. He was just the local muscle, his loyalty bought by the fragile life of his mother. He pulled over outside the gates and looked at his radio. He needed to find Evie, but not for Thorne. He needed to warn her about the insulin logic gate. He knew Thomas Harper wouldn't have just exposed the system. He would have left a way to dismantle it. The kill switch. At Silas's salvage, the decryption finished. The file insulin logic gate was not about insulin logistics, it was a Trojan blueprint. Marisol opened the file, revealing a schematic that made her gasp. Evie, she said, her voice shaking with awe and fear. Your father was incredible. This isn't just data. This is the whole architecture. The blueprint showed the internal structure of the AmeriSync data center, the physical layout of the servers, the cooling systems, and the power grid. But Thomas had circled one server rack, Rack 4, labeled Prime Stability Node. This node, Marisol explained, pointing to the schematic, it doesn't store the EVS scores. It stores the baseline. It's the master clock. If the EVS system is the engine, this is the ignition. It has a physical failsafe, a hardline access port for emergency manual overrides. Evie looked at the drawing. A kill switch. Yes, Marisol confirmed. If we can access the hardline, we can introduce a null command, a single line of code that broadcasts a system-wide reset. It will delete all predictive governance profiles, wipe the EVS scores, and force a system-wide restart back to factory municipal settings. And the insulin logic gate. Marisol scrolled down the file. It's a security exploit. Thomas figured out that the data center uses its own private network to manage all essential services, power, water, and specialized medical logistics like my son's insulin and Caleb Moore's mother's bespoke care. These systems run on an older, unpatched OS for stability. Blackmail. Evie realized. That's how they control everyone.
Precisely, Marisol said.
But that older system has a backdoor. Thomas built a frequency pulse that mimics an authorized maintenance signature. It's not a software hack. It's an electromagnetic signature. She opened the toolbox Thomas had left on the SD card. It contained a single audio file, a low, buzzing, complex sequence of tones. We need a powerful, old-school radio transmitter, Marisol said, looking up at Silas, who was listening intently from the doorway. Something that can hit the data center at the exact frequency Thomas mapped out. We need to broadcast this pulse, and it will briefly open the physical access gate to the prime stability node. That's crazy, Silas muttered. You'll blow the county off the grid. We'll buy Ridgeway a second chance, Evie countered. An hour, maybe 2, of real freedom before Mary Sink can rebuild the system. That's enough time for the people to organize and for the outside world to see the evidence. Silas walked into the office, his eyes fixed on the schematic. He looked at Evie, then at Marisol's scared, determined face. Thomas Harper saved my life. You too just bought me time to hide my business before they turn me into scrap. Silas smiled, a genuinely warm expression that cracked his weathered face. I got a CB antenna the size of a satellite dish out back. It runs off a fully analog diesel generator. I'll need 5 hours to tune the frequency to Thomas's specs. But you're not getting near that data center without transport. He walked over to a tarp draped over a vehicle in the corner. He yanked the tarp off, revealing a huge, blocky, rust-colored machine. It was a decommissioned military transport, stripped bare and rebuilt with heavy steel plating. This is the mule, Silas said, patting the hood. No GPS. No smart components. Runs on pure diesel and spite. If you want to hit the data center, you're going to need something that doesn't talk to the cloud. Evie looked from Silas, the last free mechanic, to Marisol, the fugitive data scientist, and finally to the image of the prime stability node. She picked up her father's notebook, the heavy weight grounding her. Let's get to work, Evie said. We have one night to win back the county. Part 6. The Ghost in the Machine. The atmosphere in Silas's salvage office was thick with diesel fumes and the desperate focus of 3 people attempting the impossible. Silas, wearing thick leather gloves, worked on the mammoth CB transmitter in the junkyard, the diesel generator roaring to life every few minutes with a shuddering cough. Marisol sat on the floor, surrounded by complex diagrams, double-checking the code. She would inject a single, clean line of null data designed to scrub the EVS baseline. Evie sat inside the mule, the decommissioned transport vehicle. The interior was Spartan, all cold steel and rough canvas. She was studying Thomas's schematic of the data center, memorizing the fastest path to Rack 4. She touched the black notebook resting beside her. It wasn't just a record of the county's death. It was Thomas's final testament. He hadn't fought for a perfect system. He had fought for the right to fail outside of one. People aren't data. Evie closed her eyes, visualizing the path, breaching the perimeter, locating the utility tunnel, finding the hardline access panel behind the prime stability node. It was a route mapped by a librarian who had spent years tracing the weak points of the digital architecture that consumed his town. Meanwhile, Caleb Moore was sitting in his cruiser in the dark parking lot of the Ridgeway County Hospital, watching the lights of the long-term care wing. He looked at the Mary Sink tablet Thorne had given him, displaying his mother's medical logistics file. He was the sheriff of a ghost town, a man whose badge was merely a digital placeholder for corporate control. He had been chasing shadows all night, following algorithm-generated routes that led only to empty fields and locked sheds. The system was designed to contain anomalies, and Evie Harper was the biggest anomaly they'd encountered. He radioed his 2 deputies, sending them on a fake search pattern near the state border, knowing they were good men who shouldn't be involved in this digital witch hunt. Caleb turned off his cruiser's engine. He opened his glove compartment and pulled out an old, beat-up, non-networked flip phone. He used it only for emergencies, true analog emergencies. He pressed the single speed dial number programmed into it, Evie's old editor at the Chicago Tribune. "This is Sheriff Moore," Caleb said into the phone, his voice flat. "I have a story for you. It concerns Ridgeway County, a journalist named Evie Harper, and corporate fraud on a mass scale. You need to send someone to the county line fast. I'm going to make sure the door is open for the truth to walk out." He hung up, the decision made. His gold score didn't matter. His mother's life was the price, but if he stayed compliant, the whole town was going to pay that price forever. He couldn't save his mother and the county, but he could make sure a Mary Sink didn't get away with it silently. Caleb started the cruiser and began driving toward the data center, but not on the main road. He knew Thomas Harper's maps of the old utility routes better than anyone. He was going to meet Evie at the wall. The breach. At 2 a.m., Evie and Marisol were strapped into the cabin of the mule. Silas stood by the chain-link gate, a massive, rusted anchor in the dark. "I'm sending the pulse in 10 minutes, Silas said through the open window of the vehicle. "It's going to hit the data center like an EMP. For exactly 60 seconds, the exterior security gates will revert to manual override. If you're not in, you're locked out for good." "What about the data center's main power?" Marisol asked, clutching the tablet. "The main grid is hardened against EMPs, Silas confirmed. But Thomas found the weakness, the old maintenance OS that runs the exterior locks and that specialized logistics gate. It's what keeps the medicine flowing. The pulse will bypass the security, but it'll also briefly decouple the prime stability node from the primary network." Evie looked at Marisol. "Ready, as I'll ever be," Marisol breathed, her fingers flying over the tablet keyboard, cueing the system reset code. Evie slammed the heavy transmission into gear. The mule roared to life, its ancient diesel engine shaking the cab. She drove out of the junkyard, the heavy, plated vehicle an insult to the sleek, smart cars of Ridgeway. She didn't take the paved road. Instead, she followed an old, abandoned pipeline route that Thomas had marked. The mule crashed through overgrown brush, kicking up dust and rock, staying below the level of the drone surveillance grid. 5 minutes later, the data center loomed ahead, a fortress of light and silence. The perimeter was secured by a 15-foot electrified fence and 2 automated gates. 1 minute to pulse, Marisol whispered, staring at a small digital timer on the tablet. Evie stopped the mule 100 yards from the fence. She killed the lights. "Silas, we're in position," Evie said into the repurposed CB radio. Crackle. "Frequency set. Good luck, Harper. Don't die free." Crackle. Evie put her hands on the wheel, waiting. The air was tense, humming with static energy. T-minus 10 seconds. Suddenly, the air filled with a sound that wasn't a siren or a crash, but a low, invasive tone. It was the sound of Thomas Harper's electromagnetic signature blasting across the county. It felt like a physical pressure wave. The lights of the data center flickered, but did not go out. Then, the electrified fence went dark. The 2 massive entry gates, which had been sealed shut, slowly, grindingly, began to slide open, reverting to their manual default. 60 seconds. Marisol yelled, "Go!" Evie floored the accelerator. The mule hit the gates at 30 miles an hour, not needing to stop. It smashed through the still opening gates, tearing the metal framework aside. The crash was deafening. Evie gripped the wheel, feeling the impact rattle through her teeth. They were inside the perimeter. Evie drove the mule right up to the wall of the data center, stopping next to the large utility panel Thomas had marked on the schematic. Marisol unbuckled. The access port is behind that panel. I need 5 seconds on the hard line to push the null command. As Marisol scrambled out, Evie grabbed the fire axe Silas had welded to the mule's chassis. I'll cover the main tunnel. If anyone comes, don't stop. Push the code. The cost of truth. Evie was kicking open the heavy, reinforced utility panel when the lights of a cruiser illuminated the yard. Sheriff Caleb Moore. He wasn't moving to arrest them. He was parked diagonally, blocking the path back toward the destroyed gates. Evie, stop. Caleb yelled, leaping out of his cruiser. He had his sidearm drawn, but it was pointed at the ground. Marisol froze, the exposed wires in her hand. Caleb, you have 4 seconds before the gates lock again. Evie shouted, You're in the way. I'm trying to save you, Caleb said, desperation in his voice. Thorn knows. He predicted you'd use a back door. He's already inside, waiting for you to hit rack 4. He's got his tactical team covering the prime stability node. Evie lowered the axe slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because he showed me the file. My mother's file. He controls the medicine that keeps her alive. It's the same leverage he has over you, Marisol, your son's insulin. Caleb looked broken, his gold score uniform meaningless. I'm compromised, Evie. I'm compromised and he knows it. Then get out of the way, Caleb, and be compromised with a clean conscience. Before Caleb could respond, the access door to the facility burst open. Julian Thorne stepped out, holding a tablet, flanked by the 2 large security men in tactical polos. Sheriff, you are failing your objective. Thorne's voice cut through the air, amplified by a throat mic. Arrest them now, or I initiate the care downgrade protocol. Thorne held up the tablet, showing Caleb a schematic of his mother's medical supply chain. A red box pulsed over the image, initiating logistics failsafe. Caleb looked at the screen, his mother's life. He looked at Evie, his hands heavy on his weapon. The choice was brutally simple, his mother or his town. Marisol, now. Evie screamed, lifting the axe to confront Thorne. Caleb raised his weapon. He didn't point it at Evie. He spun and fired 2 quick, devastating rounds. Not at a person, but at the cruiser he had just driven, the very symbol of his compliance. The bullet shattered the GPS unit on the dashboard and blew out the primary transmission fluid line, crippling the networked vehicle. The cruiser's lights died. The police are now offline, Thorne, Caleb said, dropping his gun. He walked toward Thorne, his hands raised in surrender. I forfeit my badge. I resign. My mother's fate is on your head, but Evie Harper is out of my jurisdiction. Thorne stared, his face contorted in disbelief. You fool. You just signed her death warrant. She's already dead inside your system, Julian, Caleb said, grabbing Thorne's arm. And now you have a real, physical problem. While Caleb distracted Thorne, Evie swung the axe, splintering the utility panel. Marisol plunged the hardline cable into the exposed port. Access granted. Marisol yelled, pushing the null command. She slammed her finger down on the tablet screen. The reset command surged through the cable. Inside the data center, a single, high-pitched scream of feedback ripped through the air. Evie saw Thorne's security men grab their heads. The data center lights flickered rapidly, violently, going through a seizure of color, red, green, blue, then settled into a single, uniform white. The massive, humming building was silent. The data center systems were offline. The EVS scores, the predictive governance models, the throttling algorithms, all wiped, reset to a clean municipal slate. Marisol pulled the cable out and stumbled back, her face streaked with tears and dirt. It's done. We have an hour, maybe less, before they can initiate manual override. That's all we need, Evie said. She looked at Caleb, who was now being tackled by Thorne's security. Get out of here, Caleb yelled. Use the mule. Go to the line. Evie grabbed the tablet and Marisol. She jumped back into the mule and fired the engine. She drove the heavily damaged vehicle straight past the compromised sheriff and the stunned Immersive crew. As they reached the still-open gate, the towering structures of the Immersive data center stood silent and inert behind them. The hum was gone. Evie slammed the gas pedal down, driving straight for the faint, pale lights of the state highway. The true, final county line. Part 7, Chapters 19 to 21. The Resolution. The open road. The mule was shaking apart, the engine screaming as Evie pushed the heavy transport toward the state highway. The front end was crumpled from smashing through the data center gates, and the steel chassis rattled with every turn. Marisol held the ruggedized tablet, watching the digital timer on the screen, the countdown until Immersive could initiate manual override and rebuild the entire EVS system. 30 minutes left. Marisol yelled over the roar of the engine. They're going to try to push a hard reboot. If we're still in the county when that happens, they can geotag the tablet and track us instantly. Evie squinted into the rearview mirror. 3 sets of headlights, sleek, black Immersive security vehicles, had emerged from the dark and were gaining fast. They were moving without the assistance of the predictive algorithm, relying on brute force and high-performance engines. They're too fast, Evie muttered, gripping the wheel. Silas, can you hear us? Crackle. Barely. You've woken the beast, Evie. I'm seeing traffic warnings everywhere. My repeater is flickering. Give me a diversion, Silas.
Anything.
Crackle. The old water reservoir off Route 18. It runs off a separate, unmonitored pump station. Thomas installed a manual drain trigger for fire emergencies. It's analog, Evie. Hit the red box on the east wall, and you'll flood the access road. Give you maybe 5 minutes. Understood. Evie swerved the mule onto a dirt access road that plunged into a dense thicket of trees. The security vehicles followed without hesitation. Evie reached the reservoir station, a small, concrete shed surrounded by a fence. She slammed on the brakes. Marisol, pump house. Hit the red box. I'll cover the approach. Marisol burst out of the passenger door just as the first security vehicle slid to a stop behind them. 2 tactical personnel jumped out, illuminated by their headlights. Evie grabbed the fire axe, holding it defensively. Stay back. We have the data and we're gone. Surrender the assets, Miss Harper. A voice boomed from the security car's loudspeaker. This is your final warning. Marisol ripped open the pump house door and found the box. She slammed the large, dusty red lever. With a deep, metallic groan, the reservoir began to drain. A powerful, muddy current erupted from the outflow pipes, immediately turning the dirt road into a rushing torrent. The security personnel paused, faced with a sudden, growing river of water. It was enough. Evie jumped back into the mule. Go, go, go. They roared back onto the main road, the floodwaters temporarily stalling the pursuit. 10 minutes, Evie. We have 10 minutes to hit the line. Marisol yelled, pointing ahead to where the road changed from black Immersive asphalt to scarred gray state highway. Evie drove harder than she ever had, the heavy transport vehicle finally reaching its top speed. They hit the county line, the simple, painted white stripe on the highway, with a deafening clatter as the mule finally shed a loose piece of its damaged chassis. They crossed it and kept going, not stopping for another mile until they reached the designated rendezvous point, a poorly lit, greasy gas station just across the border, in the jurisdiction of an entirely different, non-smart county. Evie killed the engine. Silence. The mule was silent, smoking, and victorious. The anchor. As Evie and Marisol stumbled out of the mule, exhausted, two vehicles were waiting in the gas station parking lot. One was an unmarked sedan, the other, a large news van with the mast partially raised. Two people, a tired-looking woman with a press ID lanyard and a cameraman, rushed toward them. Evie Harper, the woman, who looked to be in her early 40s, asked, "I'm Joan Rivers, Chicago Tribune. Caleb Moore called us. He said you have everything." Evie nodded, pulling the battered tablet from her jacket. It felt impossibly heavy. "We have the script. We have the scores. We have the insulin logic gate." Joan took the tablet. "Let's get this to the world." Back at the data center, Julian Thorne stared at the now silent servers. The system was inert, wiped clean. The prime stability node was running on default, generic municipal code. He had Caleb Moore shackled to a pipe in an empty server room. The two Immersive security men were standing guard. "You ruined 5 years of work, Caleb," Thorne said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion, looking only at his own functioning Immersive tablet. "The market is going to crash. We're going to lose billions. And all because of your pathetic, sentimental weakness." Caleb looked up, bruised but resolute. "I did it because I saw what you were willing to do to my mother. You don't save people, Thorne. You just organize them for liquidation." Thorne smiled, the corporate mask firmly back in place. "That's the beauty of it, Caleb. We don't need the predictive system to find your mother. We just need to know which server runs the bespoke logistics gate for her specific medication. It's a simple, manual adjustment. And I'm making it right now."
He tapped the tablet.
"Logistics failsafe. Initiate immediate cancellation." Caleb closed his eyes, accepting the final, devastating price. "But you're wrong about one thing," Thorne continued, a hint of confusion in his voice. He tapped the screen repeatedly. "The command is not executing." Thorne stared at the tablet, his composure finally breaking. "What did you do?" he hissed at Caleb. "I didn't do anything, Julian," Caleb said, looking confused. Marisol's voice, relayed through a small microphone attached to Evie's recorder, played from the tablet speaker. A short, synthesized loop Evie had inserted into the reset sequence. "The insulin logic gate is neutralized. The specialized medical supply chain is now routed through the default, unmonitored, analog federal registry for emergency service. If you cancel it for everyone." Thorne's face went white. By linking the bespoke logistics gate to the generic emergency registry, Marisol had turned Caleb's mother and Marisol's son into a digital shield. Thorne couldn't cut off their life support without committing mass, observable, and reportable federal healthcare fraud. "Thomas Harper," Thorne breathed, looking at the silent server racks. "Even dead, he still wins." The truth upload. Back at the gas station, Joan and Evie were huddled in the back of the news van, the laptop connected to the van's satellite uplink. "We have to upload everything, the town hall footage, the EVS spreadsheet, the baseline files, all of it," Evie said. "We need to hit every major network, not just the Tribune." The upload status bar crawled forward. Marisol sat watching the progress, her tense shoulders finally relaxing. "You know what happens now?" Marisol asked. "Ridgeway is free, but they're not safe. Immersive is going to fight back. They'll sue the county into oblivion." "Let them," Evie said, watching the upload reach 99%. "The people of Ridgeway just got their local governance back. Their mayor is compromised, their infrastructure is broken, and their sheriff is locked up. They have to start from scratch." "That sounds terrifying," Marisol admitted. "It sounds like freedom," Evie corrected. "It sounds like a community getting to make its own mistakes again." The upload completed. The Tribune editor received the files. The news van's satellite mast was now beaming the story of Ridgeway, the story of predictive governance, manufactured unrest, and algorithmically enforced austerity to the entire world. Evie closed the laptop. She looked at Marisol, then out at the dark, silent fields of the neighboring county. The immediate relief was followed by the sober realization of the fight ahead. The data was out, but the system itself, the idea of corporate control through convenience, was still looming over the rest of the country. Evie pulled Thomas Harper's black notebook from her pocket one last time. She opened it to the last page, where the schematic of the data center was drawn. Underneath the drawing, her father had written one final, looping sentence. The only true defense is the paper trail. Evie knew the story of Ridgeway wasn't finished. It was just the beginning of a much larger national investigation. The county line had been breached, but the war for the truth had just started.
Epilogue.
The fallout from the Ridgeway expose was immediate and explosive. Within 48 hours, the Immersive stock plunged 60% as governments around the world, who had been considering similar smart governance contracts, immediately suspended negotiations. The evidence, disseminated globally by the Chicago Tribune and multiple international news outlets, was too damning to ignore. Explicit proof of algorithmic bias, political manipulation, and the manufacturing of civil disorder. In Ridgeway, the power vacuum was filled by chaos and hope. The mayor resigned. Julian Thorne was arrested by federal agents upon the filing of charges related to conspiracy and complex fraud, his corporate immunity dissolved by the public outcry. Sheriff Caleb Moore, stripped of his badge, was released on bond after community members, including Frank Miller, testified on his behalf. Though he faced charges for property damage, the destruction of his cruiser, his actions in disabling the digital threat were deemed necessary by a newly appointed special prosecutor. More importantly, his mother's bespoke medical care, now routed through the emergency federal registry thanks to Marisol's hack, was safe. Marisol Vega, her anonymity shattered, faced months of legal wrangling but emerged a hero in the press, providing essential testimony on the inner workings of the EVS system. She and her son left Ridgeway, but not before Marisol helped establish a decentralized, open-source data co-op to safeguard local infrastructure until a new, democratically elected city council could take over. Evie Harper returned to Chicago, not to obscurity, but to a promotion and the leadership of a new investigative unit focused on data integrity and corporate governance. She carried her father's notebook with her everywhere, the physical defense against the digital lie. Ridgeway County was bankrupt, fractured, and cold, but it was finally free. The lights of the Immersive data center remained a dull, useless white, a tombstone for the idea that human lives could be governed by a predictive score. The people of Ridgeway gathered, not at a town hall dictated by a corporation, but at Frank Miller's salvaged auto shop. They began the long, hard process of rebuilding, relying on analog conversations, paper ballots, and the simple, messy understanding that governing a community is a human job, not an algorithm's. The war for the county line was over, but the defense of the paper trail had just begun. The end.